Welcome to Missing in Ohio, a podcast devoted to telling the stories of Ohio's missing loved ones. I am your host, Kelly Hammonds, and this is Chapter 8, The Disappearance of Brian Shaffer. Brian Randall Shaffer, a second-year medical student at The Ohio State University, is a missing adult from Columbus, Ohio. Brian was last seen on April 1, 2006, on CCTV outside the Ugly Tuna Saloon at 1:55 a.m. He was 27 years old at the time of his disappearance and would be 40 years old today. Brian is a white male that is approximately 6 foot 2 inches tall and 170 pounds with brown hair and hazel eyes. He was last seen wearing an olive green polo shirt with a long sleeve white shirt underneath, denim jeans, and white tennis shoes. He was also wearing a yellow cancer awareness bracelet. Brian has a black spot on his left iris and a Pearl Jam stickman tattoo on his upper right arm. If you have any information on the disappearance of Brian Shaffer, please contact the Columbus Police Department at 614-645-4545. It is difficult to discuss missing persons in Ohio without Brian Shaffer's name being mentioned. What started out as a spring break celebration within minutes turned into one of Ohio's greatest mysteries. Brian Randall Shaffer, a second-year medical student, has been missing from Columbus, Ohio since April 1, 2006. Leading up to his disappearance, Brian's life had seen both the good and the bad. On March 5, 2006, Brian's mother, Renee Shaffer, passed away after a battle with cancer. Even though he was struggling with the passing of his mother, Brian was handling everything being thrown at him. Throughout the month of March, Brian worked through his grief and dove into studying for his finals. March 31, 2006 was the start of spring break for Brian. As a way of unwinding, him and his girlfriend, Alexis Wagner, had a trip planned for Florida. They would be leaving on Monday, April 3, 2006, but made plans to hang out with family and friends before their trip. Alexis headed to Toledo to visit her family and spend time with the family dog that had failing health. Brian planned a quiet dinner with his father, followed by a night of bar hopping with his friend Clint Florence. Brian began his evening by having dinner with his father at Outback Steakhouse in Reynoldsburg, Ohio. According to his father Randy, Brian seemed tired from finals, but nothing seemed out of the ordinary. After dinner, Brian went back to his apartment and waited for the arrival of his friend Clint so they could begin their evening. Brian and Clint began their evening by walking to the Ugly Tuna Saloon at approximately 9:30 p.m. At 10:30 p.m., Brian called his girlfriend, Alexis Wagner. Around 11 p.m., Brian and Clint went to the Short North Tavern. At approximately 11:40, the duo went to Brothers Bar. Around this time, Brian and Clint were joined by a friend of Clint's named Meredith Reed. Meredith then drove the three of them to the Ugly Tuna Saloon where Clint and Brian began their night. At 1:15 a.m., Brian, Clint, and Meredith are seen arriving at the Ugly Tuna Saloon on CCTV. At 1:55 a.m., Brian is seen on CCTV outside the Ugly Tuna Saloon speaking with two girls, later identified as Amber and Brighton. Brian then walks off camera and has not been seen since. All weekend, Alexis called Brian's phone as normal, but didn't get an answer. Even though him not answering bothered her, she just suspected Brian had drunk a little too much the night before and would answer when he woke up. However, when Sunday rolled around and there was still no answer, Alexis called Brian's family to see if they had heard from him. When she realized no one had heard from him, she left Toledo and drove straight to Brian's apartment. Upon arriving, she noticed that Brian's car was parked in his parking spot. She entered his apartment at 208 King Avenue expecting to find Brian, but he wasn't there. After a quick look around the apartment, she noticed that nothing looked out of place and his bed was made and appeared that it hadn't been slept in. Fearing the worst, she called Brian's family again, and they all began looking for Brian. After some phone calls, they quickly realized no one had heard from Brian or seen him since Friday night when he was out with his friend Clint. Even though some of the family thought Brian was just taking a break and would return, some family members knew this was out of character for Brian and began to search for him. His family searched around his apartment and quickly made their way to the campus area bars where Brian was last seen. While out searching, they left no stone unturned, even searching dumpsters all around the area, thinking he could have gotten into a fight or been injured and tossed into a dumpster. Their search didn't turn up any clues. It was still in the back of the minds of Brian's family that he would return before the trip he was taking to Florida with Alexis. When Monday rolled around, Alexis went to the airport to meet Brian as planned, only Brian didn't show up. Brian not showing up was the confirmation that Alexis and the Shaffer family needed to know that there was definitely something wrong. Shortly after, Randy Shaffer contacted the Columbus Police Department and reported Brian missing. The investigation took off immediately with the Columbus Police Department. The area where Brian went missing was canvassed. Search and cadaver dogs were brought in to search the Ugly Tuna Saloon and the area around it. Dumpsters were checked. The people Brian was last seen with were interviewed, and dogs were taken to the dump site. Family and friends began doing what they could by distributing flyers, doing interviews with local media, and even searching the Olentangy River for signs of Brian. A month goes by, and there was still no sign of Brian, and despite everything being done to locate him, there were no clues either. Brian Shaffer had vanished without a trace. Then, in May of 2006, the Columbus Police Department thought they may finally have a break when Brian's apartment was broken into. After the police conducted their investigation, the break-in was deemed a smash and grab that was not connected to Brian's disappearance. Many valuable things were left behind, but according to Brian's family and the police, there were some DVDs and a DVD player missing. Several months go by without any clues, but that didn't stop Brian's friends and family from searching for answers. Randy Shaffer continued to raise awareness for missing persons by doing interviews with the media, hosting missing persons events, and participating in searches. Alexis was doing much of the same. She continued her nightly calls to Brian's phone, hoping he or someone would answer. Ever since the day Brian went missing, his phone would go straight to voicemail without ringing. But in September of 2006, while conducting her nightly call, something different happened. Brian's phone began to ring. It would ring 3 times, then go to voicemail. This happened not once or twice, but it happened for several hours. Alexis quickly told Brian's father and other family members, along with the Columbus Police Department, to update them with what was going on. Everyone began calling Brian's phone, hoping for an answer. The Columbus Police Department involved Brian's cellular carrier, Singular Wireless, to participate in the investigation of Brian's phone ringing. Singular Wireless determined one of 2 things could have happened. 1, either Brian's phone was turned on during this time, or 2, it was a glitch in the system causing Brian's phone to ring. Even though Brian's phone pinged a cellular tower in Hilliard, Ohio, ultimately it was determined by the Columbus Police Department and Singular Wireless that the ringing of the phone was a glitch. Months turned into years, and there was still no trace of Brian Shaffer. Then in September of 2008, tragedy struck the Shaffer family again. Ohio was rocked with hurricane-force winds causing falling branches and down power lines. During a break in the storms, Randy Shaffer decided to survey the damage done to his property. While out walking his property, Randy Shaffer was tragically killed when he was struck by a falling tree branch. With the news of Randy's death, Brian's disappearance was back front and center in the media. Randy Shaffer's obituary was posted on Legacy.com, an online obituary guest book. Many people left messages with kind words about Randy, but there was one message that caught the eye of private investigator Don Corbett. The ominous message stated, "I love you, Dad, Brian," and then in parentheses, U.S. Virgin Islands. Don shared his find with the Columbus Police Department, and the search for Brian Shaffer moved to the U.S. Virgin Islands. After the police investigated the mysterious message, they discovered that the message originated from a Franklin County Library public access computer. Ultimately, the Columbus Police Department deemed the message a cruel prank. In recent years, there have been numerous sightings and tips called in, but none have produced any new information. Brian Shaffer's disappearance remains unsolved almost 13 years since that spring break night. Recently, Nicholas West and I hosted a podcast called Comeback, The Disappearance of Brian Shaffer. Comeback is an investigative series into Brian's disappearance. During our investigation, Nick and I found a lot of information that wasn't known to the general public. We began our investigation by interviewing Derek and Maureen Shaffer, Don Corbett, Sergeant John Hurst, Lori Davis, Kevin Miles, Amber Ruick, and Brighton Zatko. We will speak more in depth on some of those conversations today. Even though Nick and I couldn't continue Comeback due to our personal lives and careers, I continued to investigate Brian's disappearance. We will also be discussing some new things we have recently discovered. Today I have asked Lori Davis and Jim Magnone to join me in discussing Brian's disappearance. Lori is a missing persons advocate and personal friend of Randy Shaffer. She has dedicated numerous hours looking for Brian. Jim and I met on Web Sleuths and have spent many hours researching and discussing every detail of Brian's disappearance. Together, the three of us have uncovered a few new never-released details that we will be discussing today, along with details you may have previously heard. I want to begin by walking through the most likely scenarios that could give us answers as to what happened to Brian. But first, I want to give you the names of everyone you're going to hear today and who they are to Brian. Randy Shaffer, Brian's father and biggest advocate. Renee Shaffer, Brian's mother. Derek Shaffer, Brian's brother. Maureen Shaffer, Derek Shaffer's wife. Alexis Wagner, Brian's girlfriend at the time of his disappearance. Don Corbett, the private investigator hired by Randy Shaffer to investigate Brian's disappearance. Sergeant John Hurst, the lead investigator with the Columbus Police Department on Brian's disappearance. Clint Florence, Brian's friend and one of the last people to see Brian the night he went missing. Meredith Reed, a friend of Clint Florence's that was out with Brian on the night he went missing. Amber Ruick, one of the girls last seen on CCTV speaking to Brian before he disappeared. Brighton Zatko, the other girl seen on CCTV speaking to Brian before he disappeared. Kevin Miles, the former president of Central Ohio Crime Stoppers. Kevin became involved very early on in Brian's disappearance. He stood beside Randy every step of the way in his search for Brian. Kevin and Randy became best friends, and Kevin even gave the eulogy at Randy's funeral. Last year, Kevin lost his battle with cancer, and right up until the end, he was searching for answers as to what happened to Brian Shaffer. Alright guys, I would love to hear what theory you think is most likely and why you chose that one. Lori, let's begin with you telling me the theory you lean more towards and why.
The theory that I lean towards regarding Brian's disappearance is that it was not a result of his own choices. I believe that Brian met with foul play after leaving the Ugly Tuna Saloona and that he is no longer alive. I lean towards this theory for quite a few reasons. Brian was out drinking, and some say it appeared that he even appeared to be drunk, or at least that it was evident that he had been drinking. In my opinion, if a person was planning to leave on their own to start a new life, I would not expect that person to booze it up on the night of his disappearance. Brian was a smart man. I would expect him to be stone cold sober if he was making such an important decision and if he was trying to cover his tracks. I know that it happens, and I've seen many cases where people have left on their own and went off and started a new life. I will say, in this day and age, that's a lot harder to do. And Brian didn't have a lot of funds, according to his father. He was not employed. He was a medical student. He had a lot of debt. So it wasn't like he had money sitting in the bank that he could go and start this new life, or at least not to my knowledge. He didn't have access to that type of money. His mother had just died, so there was going to be a life insurance policy that he may have been able to benefit from. I wouldn't think that that would be the time that he would be leaving if money was coming to him. And even if he was unhappy with his life and wanted to leave, I would think that he would wait until that life insurance money was in his hands. He was also planning to leave that Monday with his girlfriend. The trip was a gift from his mother. It was a Christmas gift, and it was the last Christmas gift that his mother was able to give him before she passed away. According to Randy, Brian was really excited about that trip, and he may have even been considering proposing on that trip. There had been talks that he possibly had even talked to a few people about engagement rings for Alexis. I'm not positive, if that's the truth or not, because, Randy would say that, and then in the next breath he would say, but I don't know, I think he would have told me if he was going to propose. So he may or may not have been, but I do know, according to Randy, that he was excited about the upcoming trip. And the last thing that I would say is, people say a lot that Brian's, been killed and his body was placed in the Ugly Tuna, and the Ugly Tuna was completely remodeled this year after they closed down, or I guess I should say the building that the Ugly Tuna Saloon was in has been remodeled. And to my knowledge, there's been no sign of Brian that was ever found, even after that remodeling. So that's my theory. I will say I've been involved with this case since 2006, and I have gone through many, many phases where I can convince myself that Brian left, on his own accord. I can convince myself that the people that were out with him that night know more than what they've said. I can convince myself that Brian may have been depressed. And yes, I've read the MySpace, what he had wrote on there about wanting to go sit on a beach. And, I get that I don't know that any of us know where Brian Shaffer is, because if we did, I can tell you, we would have found him and either given him a big hug and told him that we are very thankful that he's alive. Yes, I would be angry, but I'd much rather that be the outcome, because I've been asked numerous times through the years, what would you do if Brian was found alive? Would you be mad at him? I wouldn't be mad at Brian. I would say that, there were issues, evidently, some very serious issues that would have caused him to run if he did do that. The only other outcome is that Brian's dead, and that's not a good outcome. So my hopes is that one day we will have answers, and of course I want it to be that Brian's alive. I don't personally deep down believe that that is the case. And I won't stop on this case until we do find Brian. Yes, I've got to take breaks sometimes just for my own mental health, but I will be in this until we know where Brian Shaffer is. And if he is past, if he has passed away, then we will make sure that he is given a proper burial. I just want positive things to happen and to know some answers that we haven't known for, 13 years now. And that's hard. That's a long time. So that's my theory today. 2019. Thank you for doing this podcast, though. And I pray that we get answers in Brian's case, and that we're not waiting another year, another 2 years to figure out where Brian is.
Jim, which theory do you lean more towards, and why?
Hi, Kelly. Well, thanks for having me on the show. So the question is, I guess, what do I think as far as Brian being with us still, or maybe have met with foul play? So whether he's, alive or not alive, I guess. And I can start out with some of the things that I know about the case, and maybe give you, at the end, give you a my opinion and why I'm of that opinion based on some of the things I'm going to tell you. I first became interested in Brian's case around 2008 or maybe early 2009. I was researching the Mara Murray case when I came across a picture of Brian, and it was a face shot. It was just a face shot of him, of a guy, and he was like in a blue jacket, and I clicked on it, and it said Brian Shaffer disappeared on April 1st, 2006. This man walked into a bar and was never seen leaving and never seen again. And I'm thinking, okay, well, this has got to be easy to solve. What's going on here, you know? So it turns out this disappearance happened in Columbus, Ohio, and I've been to Columbus many times. I don't live far away, and I have many friends that live in Columbus. And so I got interested in this right off. Very intriguing. So some of the things that I started to do was into looking into the case. Some of the things early on that I found out, I was looking into this case for years, but never really got serious about it until maybe, about 3 years ago. And I found out there was a lot of people like yourself and people like Lori, who was close to Brian's dad, and a lot of good people who were trying to find out what happened to Brian. And some of the things I found out in no particular order. I'll just start out. One of the things that was very interesting, there was a post on a blog that I had found that was no longer there. You can't find it. I found it buried it was of a man who called himself Brian 1979, and I think that's the date that Brian was born. And he was posting on this blog, and he was saying, I feel for Brian. I hope he's found. And this was about a week, I think, into his disappearance. And he's like, maybe Brian just walked away. Maybe he's homeless now. But I've been there. I could tell you that if I was going to do it, this is what I would do. And he goes into detail about buying a bus ticket, and this is what he would do. But then at the very end, he made a comment, and he says, and you can bleep this out if you want. I'll name the place, but he said there is a place that is near an Army Navy store that is close to where the bar was, and he said that there are some freshly planted trees, and boy, one could really bury a body underneath there if anybody was had enough nerve to go look or check it out. And I'm thinking, wow, okay. So I went ahead and I got on the internet and I searched for this place, and it's a bar. It's a bar that Brian and Clint would have had to have walked by to get to the Ugly Tuna, and would have had to walk by to get home. And I called Detective Hurst. I did a little bit of digging, and I found that there was some planted trees there. I found some photos, and it's odd how these trees were planted in this outside garden area, right, and kind of for no reason. They're actually planted on concrete, and there was just dirt and some bricks surrounding the dirt, and then they planted trees. And again, I'm not saying that this place had anything to do, but this is what this man said. He made reference to it. So I called Detective Hurst, and he ended up calling me back, and I started to tell him about what I had found out, and he immediately said, well, we know about that place, and we searched it already with dogs. And I thought, wow, this guy's been on they're on the ball. They are taking tips seriously, and this was, again, about a week after Brian went missing. So after that, I was looking into some other things here, and one of the things that I find interesting is the timeline. So Brian was last seen on camera at 1:55, and I think 44 seconds to be exact. At that time, he walked off camera, and we now know, and I think this is something that you had interviewed Brighton about, was they walked off camera and went back underneath the camera into the little hallway area and talked for a little while, maybe a minute or two. And then at 2 a.m., Clint and Meredith were seen going down the escalator. Now, if you really crunch this timeline down, you have maybe 2-3 minutes or less that Brian was seen, and all of a sudden he disappears, and his phone is shut off, because we know that Meredith used Clint's phone when they got outside and made a call at 2:01 and said to Brian, where the hell are you? So What I find interesting about this is that I've been to this bar. It's very small. Supposedly, Clint and Meredith were in the bar. They were searching around for Brian, and they went to the bathrooms, looked around, and Brian had to be outside. He had to be in the hallway talking to Brighton and Amber. I mean, we know he was, and we know what time. So it's odd that they're in there searching for Brian, but he's standing outside. And, at one vantage point when you're staying in the bar, you can see outside. And you can see the area where Brian was standing. So that to me is a little odd. And another thing I found out, there's no proof that Brian ever went back into that bar. And people say that Clint and Meredith both said Brian came in and said he was going to go back to the bar area the band, and talk to the band. And I'm thinking, well, that can't be true, because if he did that, then they know Brian where he was at. They wouldn't start searching for Brian at, say, 1:58 and then leave at 2 and say, well, we were searching for you for 2 minutes. It makes no sense. That scenario just makes no sense. So Brian, seemed to has disappeared within a minute or two, and Detective Hurst seems to think that he went down through the construction area and exited out somewhere that way. And, there's talk about the construction area and Brian maybe, falling into a hole and being covered over with concrete, or he met foul play and still was covered over with concrete. I don't discount that 100%, but I don't really find it likely. And I'm not going to go into all the reasons why. I just say that I don't find it likely. If he did exit out and he went over, the dog supposedly followed his scent over towards Wendy's, and they lost his scent. And they think he either got in a car or that was it. Either they just lost his scent. Maybe Brian did keep on walking, and for some reason the scent was lost. But I wonder if Brian didn't make it home after all. I'm wondering, how do we know he didn't walk home and go back into his house? Alexis says that there was nothing disturbed. When she got there, on a Sunday, and she said, the shower wasn't wet and this and that. Well, how would you know if something wasn't disturbed from when he left with Clint to go to the bar, or something wasn't disturbed for when he got back and took a shower and, let's say, early Saturday morning and left? You wouldn't know. There's no way of knowing. And I don't think she knew every piece of clothing he owned. If he did happen to leave with just a few items, I know his glasses were left behind, but he had contacts, and there was things that just, we don't know for sure whether he came back or not. But we know that Brian was upset about his mom dying, and that's not a 100% reason for him to just, up and leave. But, his state of mind, he was not that good, I imagine. His mom was dying as he was trying to study for his tests. I can't imagine, going through that at such a young age. And about a week after his mother passed away, I know he told Alexis to move on. Well, first he asked her to run away with him about a week after. And she, I don't know if she took him serious or not, but we won't know the actual extent of the conversation and how it was worded. But that didn't happen, obviously. And then about a week later, he asked her to move on. And then all of a sudden they were going to go on this trip. And the trip, and you know more about this than I do, but the trip apparently was planned for a while. And to my knowledge, there was no ring that was ever bought. I couldn't find out. I think there was talk about a ring at one point, maybe with his mother, but there was no ring to be found. I have spoken with Don Corbett on 2 or 3 separate occasions. And some of the things he told me that were kind of confidential and some weren't. And again, these are things that I think show his state of mind and where he was at with his relationship. And there's a lot of misinformation out there, and there's a lot of things that aren't being said. And I only think the things that need to be said are the things that are relevant to his state of mind. And, him and Alexis, I think, were very close, and there's no denying that. But, there was talk about him possibly having some type of relationship with somebody else. And I'm not going to name names, but all I'll say is if that is true, and my understanding it is, then, that shows that there isn't as much of a serious relationship as people might have thought with Alexis. I also know the night that he went out with his father, the night that he disappeared, they went out to dinner, and he expressed to his dad that he wasn't sure about getting married. So that's another reason I think that maybe Brian did maybe run away. Him and his brother Derek, they were close, but I don't think they were any more close than any typical brothers were or are. They had different interests, different friends, but on that particular night, he had asked Derek to meet him at the bars and to go out, and his brother, elected not to for whatever reason. I think he said he was tired or something like that, or it was late. But to me, it was almost like he was trying to. Maybe it was a goodbye. Maybe it was just him saying, I want to be with the people closest. And maybe he knew. And maybe he knew he was leaving, not necessarily that night, but very soon. Found out that Brian took a trip to Puerto Rico, and he went without Alexis. This is while they were seeing each other. I don't know much about the trip. It doesn't seem like many people do, but I do have a photo I've seen of him there in Puerto Rico. He did bring Alexis back a stuffed bear from there, so it is known that he went to Puerto Rico. He was familiar with a place that, if Brian did leave, maybe he went to Puerto Rico, maybe he went to Virgin Islands. You don't need a passport to this day, as far as I know. So, again, something to think about as to whether or not maybe he did run away. Something else I want to mention that I've never seen corrected. Almost everybody, as far as some of the misinformation, the bar, the Ugly Tuna. The bar closed at 2:30 a.m., not 2 o'clock. Last call was, I think, around 2:10. And I confirmed this not only with a few of my friends that live in Columbus that had been there for years and did the college thing, but I even called the Ugly Tuna. And I asked them what time he closed. And then I asked one of the girls, I said, is this, something that's just been, all the time, like you always close at 2:30, and yeah, she confirmed it. So last call was at 2:10. The bar closed at 2:30. A lot of people seem to think that the bar was closed and everybody was being rushed out, and that's not the case. And I think that's an important thing to know. Another issue I wanted to discuss real quickly here is there was an interview with Alexis around 2015, I believe. And if you listen to the interview, she makes a couple comments where, number one, she says, I thought it was a good relationship, or I thought it was a normal relationship. And then she mentions something like, with a lot of time and now that, things aren't so, she mentioned earlier that she goes, I could never imagine Brian leaving. That's why I thought maybe something bad happened to him. She goes, but with a lot of time. And she mentions it, and I don't remember her exact words, but, it made me think, she does think that it's possible he did run away. And this was just a couple years ago in an interview. Again, kind of telling. So with that being said, I guess the question is, do I believe Brian is still alive and out there living his life? Or did he meet with some kind of foul play or have an accident and is no longer with us? Well, I can tell you that out of everything that I've found out, I have no evidence whatsoever that points to his death. But on the flip side, I don't have any evidence at all that shows he's alive. And what I do have, and this is my opinion, is a lot of evidence that points to Brian was very unhappy, and Brian may have wanted to leave and may have planned things out for a long time. Not even just because of his mother, but before this, with things that he has said on his MySpace page, with the trips that he had made, and not everything that I found out I'd have time to tell everybody, and but that's some of the things that point to I think Brian possibly is still alive. I don't think we can discard these things and just say, well, they don't mean anything and he's dead. We don't know, but let's hope. And let's hope that this year we can put this to an end and find some closure, especially for his family and the people that care about him.
As for me, I can literally argue every theory and how each could be accurate and how it could be unlikely. That is the problem when there is only speculation in Brian's disappearance and no clues. There are some theories that I lean more towards, and some that I discredit altogether. I'm going to begin by talking about the theory I discredit altogether. And that theory is that Brian was killed and or concealed inside the Ugly Tuna Saloona. I have heard so many theories on this one, such as Brian being killed by bar staff and hidden in the walls, Brian accidentally dying in the construction zone and the construction workers covering up his death for insurance reasons, to him being buried in the concrete. Let's start with being killed by the bar staff and concealed in the walls. What would be their motive to kill Brian? To believe this, you have to believe that multiple people knew about this and has never mentioned it again. It would mean that the Columbus Police Department completely botched their search, as well as the search they conducted with the search and cadaver dogs. Randy Shaffer, Brian's father, also hired his own search dogs and brought them to the bar. To add to that point, the Ugly Tuna Saloona recently closed for business. The Gateway building, where the Ugly Tuna Saloona was housed, is owned by The Ohio State University. After the closing of the bar, The Ohio State University began construction in the bar and converting it into an open office floor plan. I think it's safe to say, if Brian was in the walls of the bar, that he would have been located by now. That brings me to the construction area or basement area of the Gateway building and Brian's death being covered up by construction workers. On the night Brian disappeared, the second floor of the Gateway building, where the Ugly Tuna was located, is the only part of the building open to patrons. The ground level, or basement of the building, was under construction. The area was being sectioned off into individual retail spaces. Even though this area was closed to patrons, it was still very much being used by the tenants of the upstairs spaces. The construction area was used daily by the upstairs tenants to have access to the covered trash area, to receive deliveries, and for bands playing at the Ugly Tuna Saloona to load and unload their equipment. The area was under construction, but it was absolutely possible for anyone, including Brian, to gain access to this area. But under no circumstances do I believe a construction crew discovered his body and hid his body by burying him in concrete. First, it would be a traumatic event for anyone to discover a dead body. I seriously doubt that someone's first thought is we have to hide this body. There is no logical reason for the construction crew to do this. A lot of speculation suggests that they did it for insurance purposes, but again, I ask why. Ask yourself this. If you find a dead body at your workplace, are you going to cover it up and hide the body so your company can avoid a lawsuit? No. No one would do that. Then we have the people that suggest the construction workers accidentally buried him in the concrete. There are so many things that would have had to happen for this to even be possible. The construction crew would have had to decide to blindly pour concrete without surveying the area. The concrete would have had to be completely poured, dried, and finished on Monday morning. Remember, Brian Shaffer was reported on Monday, April 3rd, 2006, after he failed to show up at the airport. I find it pretty hard to believe that the Columbus Police Department, along with the dogs and Brian's family, didn't notice freshly poured concrete on either Monday or Tuesday when the bar was searched. Randy Shaffer left no stone unturned when it came to finding his son, and he would not have let something like this left unchecked. Everyone involved in this case believed that Brian got out of that bar through an alternate exit. Now, as for what happened to Brian after that, I don't know. But these are the two theories, in my opinion, that are most likely. The first theory I lean towards is Brian meeting foul play after he left the bar. There are two ways to look at this question. Was it a crime of opportunity, or did someone that knew Brian kill him? Let's start with the crime of opportunity. My biggest problem with this theory is with no body, it doesn't fit a crime of opportunity. If he was robbed and beaten while walking home, the suspected robber or killer would not take the time to hide Brian's body. They may try to conceal his body, but not hide it in such a way that his remains are never found. Before my interview with Sergeant Hurst, I thought it was very likely that Brian could have been left in a dumpster. However, after hearing the extensive search that was done at the landfill, I think Brian would have been located. Basically, my thoughts are that if Brian was murdered after he left the bar, It wasn't a crime of opportunity, and Brian knew his killer. The fact that there is still no body and someone got away with the perfect crime does give me doubts. Think of all the things that have to happen to get away with the perfect crime. Brian is not seen on the cameras at the bar leaving and is never seen again, causing everyone to believe he is a missing person. Brian manages not to be picked up by a single camera in the city of Columbus leaving the bar on his way home. Someone commits a premeditated murder and leaves absolutely no trace evidence, then hides his body so well it goes undetected for almost 13 years. Then this said person would have to go on with his life normal and fool the Columbus Police Department and the Shaffer family. I'm not saying it's impossible for all of this to happen. I'm saying that it is a lot of coincidences that had to line up to create the perfect crime. The second theory I find most likely is Brian Shaffer is alive and created a new life for himself. I know this is one of the least popular theories, but with the amount of evidence available, I would say this theory is just as likely as any other theory out there. Here's what we know about Brian. 3 weeks before his disappearance, his mother passed away. 2 weeks before his disappearance, he asked his girlfriend Alexis to run away with him. Shortly after that, he told Alexis that she should move on with her life. He was drowning in debt from student loans and credit cards. He stated before he disappeared that this doctor thing was temporary until he gets his band together and lives on an island. According to interviews I did, Brian didn't want to be his doctor as much as his parents, and especially his mother, wanted him to be. With the passing of his mother, maybe he felt as if there was no point in becoming a doctor now. Is it a coincidence that the one person not seen leaving the Ugly Tuna Saloona on CCTV is the one person that is missing? Is it a coincidence that the manual override was hit on the security camera, causing it not to be working on the night Brian disappeared? Those all very well could be coincidences, but something about it just doesn't sit well with me. Why ask Alexis to run away with him when there was a vacation planned for 2 weeks later? I think run away with me could have meant something other than a vacation. Then we have his apartment being broken into a month later. I always felt like this had more to do with Brian's disappearance than law enforcement let on. Sure, a criminal could have seen he is missing on the news and think they could take advantage of an empty apartment. However, no one said the apartment was empty. I know Alexis stayed there at times as well. I'm sure Brian's apartment had a great deal of traffic in the first few months of his disappearance. The robbery was deemed a smash and grab and not connected to the case, yet the Columbus Police Department still won't talk about the break-in or anything they did at the apartment. I have heard a lot of people mention Brian would have had a key and wouldn't have had to kick in the door, but we don't know that Brian didn't lose that key. Overall, there was a DVD player and some DVDs stolen, but there were so many other valuable items left untouched. Why leave behind the valuable stuff? To add to my theories on this, Clint's attorney made a statement that he is led to believe that Brian is alive and that it is Brian doing this to his family. In order for Attorney Rosenberg to make this statement, it had to be stated and approved by his client, Clint Florence. I will go into more detail on this point when we begin discussing Clint. I'm not saying Brian Shaffer is definitely alive. I'm just saying this theory is just as plausible as the other I mentioned. With no evidence and no body, I very much believe Brian Shaffer could be out there somewhere, living a new life. We would also like to hear the opinions of our listeners. Please go to the Missing in Ohio Facebook page and leave us your opinion. When discussing Brian Shaffer's disappearance, one name will always come up: Clint Florence. During Brian's freshman year, he and Clint were roommates in the same dorm. Not only did they live together at one point, but they also worked at JCPenney Outlet, and both were students at The Ohio State University. With so much in common, it is no wonder that they became friends. It has been heavily reported for years that Clint was one of the last people to see Brian before he vanished. There has been a lot of speculation and accusations toward Clint and his involvement with Brian's disappearance. Some people think that Clint caused harm to Brian, while others think he helped Brian start a new life. The rumors began circulating when Clint was advised by his attorney not to take a polygraph. Even though it is common to be advised not to take a polygraph, it led most people to believe that Clint had something to hide. According to the Columbus Police Department and the Shaffer family, Clint was initially involved in the search for Brian, even distributing flyers. But something happened and Clint began participating less. Is it that he told the investigators everything he knew and they simply wouldn't accept that? Or is it because he had something to hide? One thing I will say is while investigating Brian's disappearance and interviewing Sergeant John Hurst and private investigator Don Corbett, is that it is apparent that they feel Meredith is being 100% honest. This is the part that throws me off. Meredith took a polygraph and showed no signs of deception. She even developed a friendship with Randy and continued to help in any way she could with the investigation. Meredith gave a very detailed statement to law enforcement and the private investigator with the details of the things she did that weekend. Not only did her statement give her an ironclad alibi, but it also gave Clint an ironclad alibi. So if the investigators believe Meredith was being 100% truthful, why were so many suspicions about Clint? Apparently, anyone that spent time with Brian that night was asked to take a polygraph. Randy Shaffer had dinner with Brian that night and volunteered to take a polygraph. Meredith Reed spent time with Brian that night and was asked to take a polygraph. She did so and passed without deception. Clint was asked to take a polygraph but declined due to his attorney's advisement. But not everyone that spent time with Brian that night was asked to take a polygraph. So if everyone that spent time with Brian on March 31st, 2006 was asked to take a polygraph, why were Amber and Brighton never asked to take one? Amber and Brighton are the two girls last seen speaking with Brian on CCTV outside the Ugly Tuna Saloona at 1:55, and very well could be the last two people to see Brian before he went missing. I in no way think Amber and Brighton had anything to do with Brian's disappearance. I simply think if the Columbus Police Department decided to polygraph the people last seen with Brian, then they should have polygraphed everyone that spent time with Brian that night. Now what if I told you that there were several other people that spent time with Brian that night that were never asked to take a polygraph? As a matter of fact, it has never been released that Brian spent time with any other people that night. It has been heavily reported that Clint and Meredith were the last two people with Brian before he went missing. But what if I told you that's not true? A while back, private investigator Don Corbett sent me several documents that he had on Brian's disappearance. He felt that they could help me with my investigation. Among those documents were copies of Brian's cell phone records. Jim and I sat down and went through every single number on the bill from March 1st, 2006 to April 1st, 2006. On March 31st, 2006, Brian made and received several phone calls throughout the day, but what I noticed the most was how many phone calls he made during the time he was bar hopping. We were able to put a name with every single number. We focused heavily on the week that Brian went missing, and I began calling those numbers. As you can imagine, most of the people that owned the numbers in 2006 did not own those numbers now. So I turned to social media for help, and I was not disappointed. After sending several messages to the people we linked to Brian's cell phone record, I finally began getting replies back. For years, we have heard that Brian was out with his friend Clint, and they were later joined by Meredith. However, after my recent conversations, I discovered that there were several people out with Brian and Clint that night. 5 other people, to be exact. When discussing these other people and relaying my conversations, I'm not going to be using their names to protect their identity. In my first conversation with one of these individuals, this is what I found out. On March 31st, 2006, a group of medical students went out to celebrate their accomplishments after they completed their finals. Among these medical students were Brian, Clint, and 4 other medical students. The person I had this conversation with was not a medical student, nor was he a student at The Ohio State University. This person shared a mutual friend with Brian and came to town to hang out with his friend. This person told me he met and hung out with Brian for the first time on the night he disappeared. I of course questioned if it was the first time This person met Brian. Why was his number the last number that Brian called just after midnight on April 1st, 2006? He told me that his mutual friend had called Brian to find out which bar he was in so they could meet up again. This person then told me that the group of friends made their way to the Ugly Tuna Saloona to hang out with Brian. He was very clear that they met up with Brian the second time he was at the Ugly Tuna Saloona that night, and not earlier in the evening during Brian's first time there. This person didn't have a lot of information to give me, but made several comments about how it was weird to meet someone, then they go missing on the same day. I then had a short conversation with one of the other individuals that I learned was out with Brian. He was less forthcoming than the first guy I spoke with, but he did confirm that he was out with Brian and the group of guys on the night that he went missing. The other 3 guys out that night have either declined to speak with me or didn't reply at all, but I will keep trying to find out more details. This new information truly sends my thoughts racing. Why were we told that Brian only hung out with Clint and Meredith? Why were we told that Clint and Meredith were the last people seen with Brian? Why have we never heard the names of these other people? If everyone that spent time with Brian that night was given a polygraph, why weren't these individuals given one? I'm not saying these people are guilty of anything, but in my opinion, this new detail allows 5 other ways that Brian could have gotten out of that bar, or 5 other ways that Brian could have been harmed. It really bothered me that we had never heard about all these other people, so I reached out to Lori to see if she had ever heard of these people through her conversations with Randy Shaffer. I knew that Randy and Lori had a close friendship, and he shared all the details of Brian's disappearance with her. When I began telling Lori all of this, she was just as surprised to hear about all these new people as I was when I discovered this information. I have mentioned several times that Randy Shaffer left no stone left unturned when it came to finding Brian, and I don't see him letting things like this go. The fact that he never mentioned all these other names to anyone leads me to believe that Randy wasn't aware that these people were out with Brian that night. I'm not sure what all of this means and how it could be connected to the disappearance of Brian Shaffer, but I am going to keep digging and contacting people until I get answers. Everyone wants to know what happened to Brian when he walked off camera. In an interview we did with Brighton last year for Comeback, we found out exactly where Brian went when he walked off camera. At 1:55 a.m., Brian is seen on CCTV speaking to Amber and Brighton beside the escalator in front of the Ugly Tuna Saloona. It has always been reported that Brian walked off camera and went back inside the bar, but Brighton told us what actually happened when the 3 of them walked off camera. According to Brighton, as her and Amber were getting ready to leave, Brighton decided to go back into the bar to use the restroom. While she went back inside the bar, Amber and Brian stood outside the bar just under the camera and waited for Brighton. Brighton then came out of the bar. The girls said their goodbyes to Brian, and they left. Brian has not been seen since. This may be just a small change to Brian's timeline of events for that night, but think about how much that shortens the time frame in which Brian could have went missing. We see Brian, Amber, and Brighton on camera at 1:55 and 45 seconds. Then Brighton goes to the bathroom, which I assume would take a couple of minutes. Brighton returns from the bathroom, and the girls say goodbye to Brian and leave. So being generous with time, I would put the girls leaving at approximately 1:58 a.m., and Brian would have been standing outside of the bar. From police reports, we know that Clint and Meredith were searching for Brian before leaving. They were seen going down the escalator at 2:00 a.m., 2 minutes after Amber and Brighton walked away from Brian. At 2:01 a.m., Meredith used Clint's phone to call Brian to let him know that they were looking for him and leaving. At 2:09 a.m., Clint and Meredith are seen leaving the parking garage of the Gateway complex. So if Brian is standing out front of the bar at 1:58 a.m., where was he 2 minutes later when his friends were looking for him and leaving the bar? In my opinion, this new detail drastically cuts down the time frame on when Brian could have went missing. I would love to hear everyone's thoughts on this. We will have an open discussion on the Missing in Ohio Facebook page and the Missing in Ohio podcast group page. On keeping up with my investigation, one of the private investigators that I work closely with ran a background report on Brian. In doing so, we wanted to confirm that there had been no activity under Brian's name. As suspected, there was nothing new on his report. But then, as I got to the bottom of the page and started looking at Brian's email usage, I suddenly stopped. Brian's email had pinged as being used in September 2017. Of course, I assumed immediately that this was some kind of glitch, but I began calling around for answers. In my experience with a Hotmail account, an inactive email account will be deactivated after some time has passed. Brian's email address was a Hotmail account as well, so I assumed his email would no longer be active. I began by speaking to a friend of mine that works in the technology field. My first question was being Brian's email account still open, and if so, why? He first began by checking in to confirm that Brian's account is still active. As for it still being active, I was given a couple explanations. One, the account is active and has been used enough to keep Hotmail from closing it. Or two, the account has been hacked at some point, causing the account to show activity and remain open. And three, it could possibly be a glitch causing this email to show a ping in September 2017. The next question I ask is what would cause the email address to ping? The first thing he explained to me is how if someone is trying to verify the email, they can ping it to see if it is active. This sounded very likely to me until he told me that if the email was pinged, it wouldn't show the IP address the way this report does. In his opinion, it appeared the email had been used. We then began researching the IP address. We began by going back to 2006 and looking up the IP addresses that were typically used by Brian. When we searched each one of the IP addresses, they all came back to a location where Brian had either lived or used his email. This gave me hope for the new IP address showing up in 2017. What we found out is either the strangest thing we have discovered or it is one of the strangest coincidences I have seen. The IP address was registered to an address in Italy. We began by researching the address connected to the IP address. Once we had the address, we were able to determine the IP address was registered to a medical school in Italy. I don't know what all this means, but I am going to continue to dig for answers. I did contact the medical school and ask if I could send Brian's missing person flyer to see if anyone recognized him. I received a message telling me they will gladly look at the flyer, so I sent the flyer over immediately along with a summary of Brian's disappearance about a month ago. I have not heard anything since, however it did take the college over a month to reply to my first email. While doing all of this research on the email ping, Jim and I decided to look into the cell phone ping from Brian's phone that happened 6 months after he went missing. We knew there wasn't going to be a way for us to really investigate it, but we thought we could at least contact some phone companies and get their opinions. Jim contacted AT&T, and I contacted Verizon. We were both pleasantly surprised with how each company handled our questions and the answers they gave us. Jim, let's start by you telling us about your conversation with AT&T.
Out of the blue one day, I called AT&T, and it's my cell provider, cell phone provider, and I know that it was Singular at the time, and I think AT&T bought Singular. So I called up and I made a call to AT&T, and I didn't get anywhere with the first person, a lady. So I hung up and I called again, thinking I'll get somebody else. And I talked to a fellow, very nice guy, and I explained to him, I said, listen, here's why I'm calling. I'm checking in about a guy, missing person, and I explained to him, his phone was shut off and his girlfriend was calling it every night. And one day, about 6 months into her calling, the phone rang. And it would ring like 3 times and it would go to voicemail. And he said, well, did he answer? I said, no, it only went to voicemail, but it rang instead of going straight to voicemail. And he's like, okay. And I said, it did ping off a tower. And I said, this tower is about 14 miles away from where he disappeared in a place called Hilliard. And Hilliard, Ohio, which isn't really relevant for him to know, but I just mentioned it. And he said, okay. He says, well, he said, what kind of phone did he have? And I said, I don't know, but I do know what kind of phone his girlfriend had. And I said, I would imagine that they'd be similar. I said there was no GPS at the time. They were flip phones. And he started talking about the technology. And I wish I would have recorded the guy, not to play it here, but just to go back and to see how he had worded things, because some of the technology I didn't understand. But he knew how these phones worked. And he knew, and based on that, he was giving opinions on whether he thought this thing was a glitch, as they say, or if it actually was turned on. So he put me on hold a couple of times, and he came back and he said, listen, he said, if you don't mind, can I call you back in a couple of days? And I'm thinking, wow, yeah, of course. I said, I really appreciate it. So a couple of days later, my phone rings on a Saturday, and I ignored the call because I didn't know who it was. And it rang again immediately. I'm like, oh no, this is that guy calling. I'm like, I better, I didn't even realize, I didn't even expect this guy to call back, but he did. And he said, listen, he goes, I found some things out. He just want to give you my opinion. And he said, I went through the office here with some other technicians, and we all were talking about it. And he goes, some of the people are of the opinion that the phone, was a glitch. It could have been a glitch, not was a glitch, but could have been. I remember him saying that. He says, some people think it may have been turned on. And he goes, but you have two separate issues here. He says, you have the phone ringing, and he said, you also have a ping. And he said, how many times did this phone ping? And I said, to my knowledge, only once. He said, well, that's another issue. He said, if there was a glitch, it may glitch to where the phone would ring, but it pinged too. He said, so that's something totally different. And, at the end of the conversation, I said, look, I'm not trying to, to pin you to the wall and you tell me what you think. But I just said, give me your opinion on what you think, whether you think the phone was turned on or not. And he kind of laughed, like chuckled in a way, and he goes, it was turned on. He goes, that's what I believe. I believe the phone was turned back on. And I could tell all along that's what he believed, and he didn't want to really commit, but I kind of, I won't say I forced him to, but I wanted his honest opinion, and that's what he said. And that is very surprising to me, because I know, Detective Hurst had mentioned that this was a glitch, and the phone company told him it was a glitch. Now, I don't know if he's holding back on information, or the person he got a hold of was somebody, it was only one opinion, and that person just said it's a glitch, or it's a glitch in my opinion, or whatever. But according to this guy and some people that he spoke with, there really isn't a way to know for sure, but because of the ping and because of the rings, this is a different scenario, and he felt that the phone was turned on.
My conversation with the cell phone company was very informative. I explained the reason I was calling to the customer service agent that I spoke with. He was intrigued instantly and quickly began speaking to different people in the call center for answers. He came back on the line and asked if he could transfer me to an IT supervisor, but he was going to remain on the line as well. I again told the story of Brian's disappearance and the cell phone ping that happened 6 months after he went missing. For over an hour, these two gentlemen went through every possible scenario with me of what could have made the phone ping. Both Verizon employees came to the same conclusion. It is their opinion that it is highly unlikely that the activity on Brian's phone was caused by a glitch. They stated they would consider it a glitch had it only happened one time with the phone suddenly ringing. But the fact of the matter is that Brian's phone was going straight to voicemail for months, but was now ringing before going to voicemail, and it did this for hours before it went back to just going straight to voicemail. The second point they brought up is that if it was just a glitch, the cell phone wouldn't have pinged. I was told a phone will not ping a tower unless a data request is coming from the phone or by the cell phone provider to the phone. A cellular phone that is powered off will not ping a tower, and the power must be on to communicate with a cellular tower. Ultimately, it was the opinion of both gentlemen that Brian's phone was powered back on for a few hours in September of 2006. Now, whether it was Brian, the person that caused harm to Brian, or someone that found Brian's phone, we are unsure. I am, however, convinced that this was not a glitch. Our investigation into the disappearance of Brian Shaffer is ongoing. We will be doing more episodes on him in the future, as soon as we have new information available. So stay tuned. We are excited to announce on April 13, 2019, we will be having the second annual Brian Shaffer March for the Missing in Columbus, Ohio. This is an event that is designed to raise awareness for Ohio's missing loved ones and is hosted by Missing Person from Ohio and Missing in Ohio. At the Brian Shaffer March for the Missing, Family members with a missing loved one will join friends, advocates, and the general public to distribute flyers of our missing loved ones. There will also be guest speakers to offer advice and services available to families with a missing person. We will be announcing all the details on the Brian Shaffer March for the Missing within the next few weeks. You can get all the details and follow the event on the Brian Shaffer March for the Missing Facebook page. If you would like to be involved in the event or volunteer your time for the event, you can contact me at one of the many methods listed in the show notes. Brian Randall Shaffer, a second-year medical student at The Ohio State University, is a missing adult from Columbus, Ohio. Brian was last seen on April 1, 2006, on CCTV outside the Ugly Tuna Saloona at 1:55 a.m. He was 27 years old at the time of his disappearance and would be 40 years old today. Brian is a white male that is approximately 6 foot 2 inches tall and 170 pounds with brown hair and hazel eyes. He was last seen wearing an olive green polo shirt with a long sleeve white shirt underneath, denim jeans, and white tennis shoes. He was also wearing a yellow cancer awareness bracelet. Brian has a black spot on his left iris and a Pearl Jam stickman tattoo on his upper right arm. If you have any information on the disappearance of Brian Shaffer, please contact the Columbus Police Department at 614-645-4545. Missing in Ohio is an affiliate of Missing Person from Ohio. Missing Person from Ohio is a Facebook page ran by Lori Davis. Here is a Missing Persons news update by Lori and how Missing Person from Ohio can help if you have a missing loved one.
Hi, thanks so much, Kelly, for giving me the chance to talk both about the Missing Person from Ohio Facebook page as well as being able to be involved in this podcast for Brian Shaffer. I greatly appreciate all the support and all the help that you've done on Brian's case. You've been very, very a breath of fresh air, actually. It's been, almost 13 long years since Brian disappeared, and it's so nice to have somebody come in with new ideas, new thoughts. You and Jim both have been just a gift, is what I would say. So I really believe that sometime soon we will have some answers in Brian's case, and we might be able to actually solve this case and bring it to a resolution. So thank you for that. And also about the Missing Person from Ohio, it's a Facebook page that I created, I believe in 2011. I created it in honor of Brian, and then it quickly became apparent to me that there were so many missing persons in Ohio that Brian was one of a very long list of missing persons, and a lot of them haven't even received near the media publicity that Brian's case got. So I realized that the social media could be a platform where I could get the missing persons' face, their information, their vital statistics out in front of a lot of people. We're now up to almost 30,000. I think we're at 28,200 maybe now likes, and that always gives me a lot of hope because that means that's over 28,000 people that could see a post and might have the information needed to break that case and to bring that person home. For example, tonight I posted someone, it was approximately 2 hours ago, it was a 33-year-old male missing from Columbus. I spoke with the mother quite a few times, and she indicated, really she was getting no help from anyone. Yes, they had filed a missing person report, but the police really wasn't doing a lot, or at least not what she was seeing, and the media had not picked up the case. And within 2 hours, that post already reached over 1,600 people. And to be able to tell that mother that and to hear the relief and the hope in her voice, realizing that, her son, who she hasn't been able to get his face out in front of many people at all, has now already reached that many, and that's within a 2-hour period. So that's the reason I do this page. I will post any missing person from Ohio that has a missing person report filed for them. That is required. It has to be filed with their local law enforcement. Once that's done, if they do not have a flyer, I can help them with that. I can also help give them some resources that I recommend that they reach out to. I'll mention those now just in case others are listening and they have a missing family member. One is the Ohio Attorney General's office. It's through their BCI division, and they have a missing adult and missing children page where they list the missing people from Ohio. So they can be reached at 855-BCI-OHIO, and the other is NamUs, and that is www.namus.gov. That is a nationwide database of both missing and unidentified individuals. So it's a great resource to get them listed in there and to also have their DNA collected. And both of those agencies that I just listed, both can help with the DNA collection as well. So again, I appreciate every single person that follows Missing Person from Ohio. I appreciate when you like the post, and more importantly, when you share the post and share the page. That just helps draw and make our group bigger, and that helps be that many more sets of eyes that are seeing the information that we're posting. I truly believe that we can do great things together, and this isn't about me. It's not about one individual. It's about getting these people out in front of other individuals that might not even be aware that they are a missing person. So I appreciate that very much, and I also really appreciate every single person that's listening to this podcast, because that tells me that you still care about Brian's case. And I became very good friends with his father, Randy, and I absolutely 100% believe that Randy is smiling down on us, knowing that we haven't given up. We're still fighting for Brian, and we're not going to give up. So with many, many prayers that we can bring some resolution both to Brian's case and also bring awareness to all of the missing person cases in Ohio, whether they're old, whether they're new, whether they're, I don't care what color they are, what age they are, I don't care what their background is. I want to get them home to their family and hopefully get them the help that they need to be okay after their disappearance. So thank you very much, and I appreciate you all more than I can say.
If you have a missing loved one and would like us to help you tell their story, please contact us at missingpersonsinohio@gmail.com. You can also contact us through Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. All the links can be found in the show notes. You can find Missing in Ohio on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Discuss all the cases you hear on the Missing in Ohio podcast group page on Facebook. You can listen to Missing in Ohio on iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, Podbean, Stitcher, and many of the other podcast sites you enjoy. If you like Missing in Ohio and the awareness we are raising, please give us a review and give us 5 stars on whichever listening platform you enjoy. Thank you for listening to Missing in Ohio, Chapter 8, The Disappearance of Brian Shaffer. Tune in next time for Missing in Ohio, Chapter 9, The Disappearance of Beverly Potts.